Perfect.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome
To the 36%.
inaugural episode.
Woo! We finally did it.
Let's get it.
We have been telling many people about this. I have made the mistake of telling everybody that I have a podcast, not that I'm starting a podcast. So for everyone who is thinking about beginning a podcast, make sure to tell all of your friends you're starting it, not that you have one.
We're so sorry for getting everybody's hopes up in that regard. Hopefully
exactly.
this will come out in a timely enough manner.
It's a great way to get hype about it, though.
Oh,
We've
for
had
real.
angry mobs that are like, where is the podcast?
Entire mobs of people.
Oh, it's ridiculous.
So, for those of you who don't know us, my name is Brett and this is Adam.
Hey,
We're
guys.
just a couple of college kids here at Truman State University, a little liberal arts college here in the
Kirksville, Missouri.
heart of the heartland in the Midwest.
Damn straight. In a town of a population of 18,000. So yeah, being Democrats here is kind of like being a fish in like the middle of San Francisco. There's a lot of buildings. I don't know where I was
What?
going with that.
It's like a fish market in San Francisco, being a Democrat. in the
Exactly,
Midwest.
just being picked off by white liberals. I have no idea. There's
Yeah,
not many of us.
something like
that's
that.
what we're trying to say here.
So Adam and I are not originally from Missouri. I am from Kansas, which is a lot more red than the great state of Missouri. But it looks a little bit like Kirksville in the sense of, you know, we have this really small town, rural, conservative, very closely held beliefs and values. And Adam here is from Indiana.
Proud Hoosier right here, which is a good thing from where I come from. But yes, no, the land of very fast cars, corn, and soybeans. Yeah, I as well from a nice red state. We have produced some okay politicians by the names of Dick Lugar, Mitch Daniels, and then our favorite Mike Pence.
So to start this podcast, you know, Adam and I have both sat down on multiple occasions and just talked about the state of the Democratic Party here in the Midwest. There are obviously, for all of you listening, you probably identify, at least to some extent, as a liberal or maybe even a Democrat, but obviously there's a lot of problems. Coming out of 2016, pretty much no state in the Midwest went convincingly to the Democratic Party. And we've been left with a lot of questions as to why that happened, but also what's going on with the Democratic Party that we have really failed to bring in good candidates. The party doesn't really exist in the Midwest, at least not to the extent that it used to.
Yeah. And even if it does, it is very unorganized.
Right. And so there's a lot of problems. And so we just wanted to start this podcast not necessarily to offer solutions to all these problems, but just to start talking about it, to have the conversations that, you know, people should be having about the shortcomings of the party and about the direction it's headed.
Especially because oftentimes the Midwest, especially the Democratic Party here, is kind of glossed over by the coasts. There's a lot of like, you know, you hear oftentimes like stereotypes of like Trump country, and that like people in the Midwest are either, you know, all NASCAR watching Republicans. And there's liberals that watch NASCAR too, guys.
Yeah, Adam's a NASCAR watching Democrat.
Yeah,
so.
yeah. Anyways, that's not important.
Yeah.
But no, and so we also wanted to kind of give our firsthand opinion about, you know, what's it like being here in a little more conservative, moderate side of the country. Yeah,
Even the conservative side of the country.
the very conservative side
I
of
see
the
enough
country.
Confederate flags around here to feel that it's not a
Dear
moderate
God.
place to be.
Welcome to Dixie, everybody.
Yeah, no kidding. So what this podcast is going to look like, it's going to look like a little bit of everything. We're going to have a lot of stuff going on. We're going to keep it pretty loose, hopefully a little fun.
Yeah.
Maybe it's a little informative at the end of the day.
Let's hope so. It's supposed maybe a little bit. But so before we get into our first topic today, which is going to be the story that broke right before we started recording today, this being Friday the 21st, with Rod Rosenstein. So before we get into that, though, Brett and I are going to talk a little bit about ourselves. So Brett, you want to start us off?
My name is Brett Combs. I'm a senior political science major here at the Truman State University. I come from Wichita, Kansas, like I mentioned. My foray into politics was pretty non-traditional. I really didn't give a shit about politics till I got to college. I wanted to get into music, and it just so happened that when I got to school, there was no option to pursue music in the way that I wanted to. And so I looked at all of the degree listings, and I said, well, I don't know anything about politics, but surely surely political science just combines like history and talking to people, which is two things that I enjoyed. It doesn't. It doesn't combine either of those things. It's a lot more research and a lot more science heavy than it is the politics side of things, which was a little jarring at first. I'm not a numbers guy. I didn't like that. To this day, quantitative research is the bane of my existence. I saw in politics a lot of the same fundamental structures that I saw in music and what I enjoyed out of it. So I saw music as this kind of way, a storytelling device to be able to communicate with people regardless of background or viewpoint or all these kinds of things. And what music was is there's finite number of sounds you can make, but you can combine them, you can alter them, you can modify them in just the craziest, most creative ways to create something better than what you started with. In politics, the way that it's been presented to me is it's learning fundamentally the building blocks of how we interact in society and how we coexist together. And so there are finite number of building blocks. There are finite numbers of things you can do, but it really is up to your creativity and the way you combine these things, the way you modify them, you tweak them a little bit, and you can produce something that's bigger than what you started with. And that, to me, it spoke to me a lot about being able to use that as a force for change and something for good. And so ever since then, I've put up with the research projects, but it really has been a passion project of, thankfully my family is not super political, so I wasn't exposed to it in a really kind of jarring or scarring way. I can go home and have these conversations that might be a little controversial or that my parents might not agree with, but ultimately I see it as a good tool, a constructive conversation that's really reflective about, society and what we're doing in the direction we're headed, which is an important thing to be doing in this day and age when there's a lot of uncertainty. So, long story short, I'm just a guy that really likes talking. It just so happens that I got into politics at some point, and now I feel qualified to talk about it on this podcast. So that's why I'm here. Adam, tell us about yourself.
So, hey guys, I'm Adam Childers Arnold. As I said, I'm a Hoosier. I was born and raised in Indianapolis. I grew up loving history. My dad has his bachelor's degree in world history, and my parents for a long time identified as independents, but they were always very politically minded. I was raised on NPR and like Madonna, so
I was raised on disco.
it'll come out, don't worry. And so basically, like throughout like my early childhood, I was always like informed. My dad was a big influence in like the love of history, and when I like about high school time, I got a little more engaged in politics, but nothing too strong. And I chose to be a poli-sci major. Came to Truman. This is my grandfather's alma mater too, because he's from around here. So I do have some very rural roots in this regard. So I came in as a poli-sci major and instantly found like a great group of people in the college Dems here. And by the end of my first semester here at Truman, I became the president of the College Democrats of Truman State University.
Don't brag about it.
Yeah, I know. I don't like to. It's kind of odd. I'm not a fan. I was, I had a great time as the president, but it really threw me into Missouri politics. I got super engaged. I think within like a month of joining, I met Chris Koster, who was the Missouri gubernatorial candidate for the Democrats. Cool guy, very conservative for a Democrat, but welcome to Missouri, guys. Yeah. And then I met Kander like a month after that. And Jason Kander is an amazing guy. Lots of respect for him and his influence on Missouri politics.
Can't wait to get him on the pod.
Oh, exactly. Oh, my God. Can we please? An amazing voice.
Yeah, we'll make it happen.
Damn straight.
We'll pull some strings.
Exactly. So, but I got really involved in the party. In March, I got to serve as the legislative director for the College Democrats of Missouri, which doesn't do a heck of a lot, but it was a cool title.
That's our first problem with the party.
Oh, exactly.
We need direction in our legislation.
Okay, that'll be a next episode. I can rant about the subsets of the Democratic Party here. But anyway, so I became pretty involved with the Missouri Democratic Party, on like a basis of just reaching out, working with them. But I've stayed very engaged in politics, and I've really found that I have a dire love of political science. And unlike Brett, quantitative research is my shit.
It's useless.
I love it. It's so good. I never liked math, but stats somehow spoke to me. But I'm still very engaged in politics. Another thing, real quick. Brett for the entire last semester here at Truman, worked in the Missouri State Capitol
kinda just completely missed
for
that.
Senate Minority Leader
Gina Walsh.
Gina Walsh. I was waiting for
Yeah,
you to
no,
say it. Of course I know who it
I wanted to
is.
see if you remember.
Yeah. No, but come next semester for me, hopefully we'll be working in that same office. So anyways, yeah, so I love the Democratic Party despite its flaws, especially here in Missouri being hella unorganized. So that's our bit of our qualifications, if we have any, quote unquote. So you can't see it, but we're air quoting this because it's a podcast.
Enough about us.
Enough about us.
Let's get into it.
Yeah. So, but before we do that, we're going to have a bit of a break from our presenting sponsor. The presenting sponsor of the 36% with Brett and Adam is Avian Apparel. If you're tired of buying the same mainstream clothing brands, and you're looking for something to elevate your style, Avian Apparel has what you need. Avian aims to provide quality, stylish apparel for those willing to take flight. You hear that, Brett? With those wings you got.
I'm willing.
Your wingspan is long enough. With a variety of different items, including hats, shirts, hoodies, and crew necks, which are awesome, by the way, Avian can be your new one-stop shop for all your clothing needs.
We're all just walking around in hoodies, crew necks, and hats.
No pants.
No pants.
No pants.
Avian says no birds don't wear pants.
So why should we?
Yeah, exactly.
With a minimalist yet bold look, Avian Apparel demonstrates that there is indeed beauty in simplicity. Yeah, to see what all the hype is about, check out myavian.com. That's myavian.com. And use their promo code THE36, that's all caps, at checkout for 15% off your purchase. Again, use the 36 on MyAvian Apparel to save 15% on your purchase. So guys, it's time to join the flock and take flight.
Promo code is the 36. You go to myavian.com, you get 15% off. You join the crew, you take flight. It's as easy as that.
Welcome back. So, to cover our first topic, news broke about 3 hours ago about a story about Rod Rosenstein, who is the U.S. Deputy Attorney General. Before we get into the story real quick, so Rod Rosenstein is the acting U.S. Deputy Attorney General to the Justice Department. Unlike most, he's the number 2 in the Justice Department in all cases except for anything dealing with the Russian investigation, thanks to Jefferson Beauregard Sessions III. And his recusal of any matters dealing with the Russian investigation. And so anyway, so the story broke in the New York Times that he was cited back in 2017, soon after FBI Director James Comey was fired, that he talked about invoking the 25th Amendment, which would remove Trump from office, like invoking it in the cabinet, which is the only place it can be started, basically to remove a president who is ill fit based on like mental and physical conditions to serve in office, which came about due to Wilson's his stroke and that kind of thing back in the 1920s or 10s, yeah. And so this is kind of like where those roots are. And basically, like, he freaked out after Comey was fired and talked about this. He also mentions, the article cites that, like, he talked about the willingness with the, involved with the FBI to wear a wire to record Trump. Also talked about getting other federal staffers in the White House and different cabinet members to also wear wires to record Trump as evidence. People like John Kelly, and I think one other person was cited. Rod Rosenstein came out today and denied this story, or denied the story, calling it like fake news. Not fake news, but calling the story like factually incorrect. God, I hate that term, fake news. But yeah, he lied about it. Trump has come out calling this like more of a deep state conspiracy, but the White House has been decently silent on most of these matters. But it kind of begs into question recently with the anonymous New York Times hero from the cabinet.
Who wrote the op-ed?
Exactly.
Who gives a shit?
Yeah, exactly. It's ridiculous. Yeah, we're gonna that's the story and behind it. Brett,
let's unpack this a little bit.
How do we feel about Rod Rosenstein's position? What the New York Times says he said, and came out. Give me your thoughts.
So, again, we have a lot to unpack here. First and foremost, it's really, really important to note that Rod Rosenstein is basically the first figure, or the first gatekeeper, in a sense, to Trump getting rid of Robert Mueller. Because Mueller was appointed by Rosenstein, that puts Mueller out of the direct reach of the president. However, Rosenstein does still serve at the pleasure of the president, so if Trump gets rid of either Sessions or Rosenstein, they potentially, whoever replaces either of those people, because even if they replace the Attorney General, they could potentially have the power to replace the special counsel. So this story strikes me as alarming for a couple of reasons, especially with Rosenstein coming out saying this is factually inaccurate. This didn't happen. I don't believe that the 25th Amendment would apply to the president. That tells me that one of two things is happening. Either A, Rosenstein is exploring that option, which would imply that he is at least stepping up and being an adult in the room, but no one else in the administration is listening to him, which wouldn't necessarily be surprising. That's kind of the theme of what we've been seeing this entire time. It's really what the op-ed touched on, is all of the administrative heads are running their own departments free of any sort of oversight. So why would they give up the opportunity to apply their own agenda to everything? Now, and so if this is true, Rosenstein is walking it back to save face. For the reasons I mentioned, he's in a very vulnerable position in the administration and stands to lose a lot. Now, if this isn't true, if this really is just a made-up story that someone either leaked to the press or what have you, that's also dangerous because Trump could just as easily see this, get triggered by it, and go after Rosenstein anyway. I mean, he has fired people he fired Comey because Comey refused to swear an oath of loyalty to him.
Yeah, which is just crazy stuff. And the most important thing is the fact that Rosenstein, because of his position due to Jeff Sessions' recusal, he's the individual that kind of oversees the Mueller investigation in the way of having power over Mueller's removal. Mm-hmm. And so, importantly, if Trump does act and gets rid of Rosenstein, it triggers a lot of warnings and red flags for both the Republicans and Democrats in this regard, because Rosenstein has been like this issue. If Trump does fire him, it could possibly be grounds for Trump's removal due to the infringement on justice proceedings, especially if he does it to go after the Mueller investigation. Yeah. And so losing Rosenstein is dangerous in that regard because he's the buffer and the protection there. So if this is true and Mueller is and Rosenstein is just trying to save face, it's concerning because we shouldn't have a president in office who people, this is not the only report of the 25th Amendment, being considered by individuals in the administration. And so, and Brett, I know you have a lot of feelings on that. We'll get into that in a moment, but it really, it just sheds light on just how ridiculous and how crazy this whole situation is. But anyways, Brett, talk about quickly the report last week from the anonymous chief White House official and the quote-unquote constitutional crisis that would happen if they chose to invoke the 25th Amendment.
Yeah. Step one, who gives a fuck who wrote the op-ed? It's really not that important. I don't understand people's deep desire to figure this out. This op-ed did not tell us anything we didn't already know. We've known from day one. We've had reports from different people within the White House that are saying we have stopped giving the president exhaustive daily briefings. And so now it's essentially, well, again, this was from the first couple months of the administration. There were reports of saying, okay, we're only giving him things with pictures on it and very few lines of text. Ugh. And then after that, we always hear these reports. They're trickled out. They were trickled out in fire and fury, in fear, but also just the day-to-day casual conversation. And it was pretty much just accepted from the public that this guy just isn't interested in doing his job.
And even this, reports came out during the campaign that Trump only got his briefings in video form. His daily briefings today are basically Fox and Friends. Yeah. Which is freaky because we have this media-run state here in the United States. It's basically, it's a great term for it. Yeah,
instead of state-run media,
exactly,
it's a
media-run state. Because basically, if you want to figure out what Trump is thinking or going to tweet about, just watch Fox News in the morning, which is messed up. But Brett, you ranted to me the other day about the term constitutional crisis. Let's talk about that.
Yeah, so I'm sure we're throwing that term around today as well with the 25th Amendment being talked about. But with the op-ed, a lot of people said, or with anything related to the potential removal of the president, especially concerning the 25th Amendment, people keep talking about how that would present us with a constitutional crisis. I don't think anybody understands what the term constitutional crisis means in this situation. A constitutional crisis would mean that this is something that the Constitution doesn't cover, that is something that goes against the Constitution or creates some sort of conflict with the Constitution. That would be a crisis. A crisis is not something that we specifically have an amendment for. That's what the amendment is for. That is just following the Constitution. I don't see how there's a crisis in that. We have the rules for this, people. When Wilson's wife was signing laws, that was a constitutional crisis because she couldn't do that. Constitutional crisis is not the administration getting together and say, wow, this guy is clearly in decline in some capacity or very unfit to sustain the office. Let's remove him. That's exactly what it's for. Yeah. That's not a crisis.
It's ridiculous.
Oh.
It's not a crisis to use the Constitution.
Oh.
Anyways. So that right there, basically, like, that encompasses not only our feelings on, I guess, those three stories, but about what's going on right now. And so Brett and I talked about having a prediction score and seeing how good we are doing this, considering political science is it's the study of the world by looking at the past and trying to predict the future from it. So Brett and I are going to start keeping our poll, and we're going to put this out on Twitter too. Oh, yeah, additionally with that, follow us on Twitter at the 36 Podcast. We don't have many because we just started it, but yeah, look at that. But we're going to start polls and base your predictions against ours. So Brett, do you predict first and foremost that Rosenstein is going to be removed from office due to this report?
I want full disclosure here at the beginning. I don't support this idea of predicting things. I think it's a waste of rhetorical time. That being said, I'm going to engage in it because I'm dumb like that. Do I think Rosenstein's going to get fired? Yes. Do I think it's going to happen immediately? No. Do I think it's going to be a direct result of this story? Yeah, because I don't think Trump had any idea what Rosenstein was doing before this. I think eventually, and I've kind of held this as my prediction for a while now. I think once we get to a point where he's really in hot water, he's in hot water now. I just don't think he realizes it. But once, like, the Senate and the House kind of start looking at him a little more, and like we have real serious investigations into the president that are coming from Congress, I think that's when we'll start to see Nixon style just start pulling up the weeds kind of thing. I don't think we're there yet. I think we will be.
And most importantly, the only way that we really get those kinds of investigations is to vote Democrats into office, which we can all do come November on Election Day, which is exciting.
What's your prediction on the Rosenstein thing? We got a little bit away from it.
Yeah, we do. I don't think he's going to be fired directly in like the near future. He's been in hot water with the Republicans for a while.
Yeah.
And I think the president might look at him and say, "Well, you're a bastard, but most importantly, you're following the rules and guidelines that I have so adopted from Roger Stone, and that's deny, deny, deny." Who also has now been implicated in this Russian investigation.
He's going to jail.
Oh my God, I hope he goes to jail.
At some point.
Yeah, Brett and I talked about it yesterday, and we decided if these guys are guilty, we want, like, Nuremberg trials. Or at least I do. Maybe not without the hangings, but these men better get their plane tickets to Argentina.
For real.
And we're not saying they're Nazis, but you can make your own decisions.
No, but that kind of brings us to our next story of the subversion of our democratic systems and our democratic society.
You're talking Kansas?
I'm talking, well, I'll get to this.
Oh, yeah. Ooh, here we go.
Loose transition. All these people that are guilty for a lot of things, but probably the biggest one is going to be everyone's involvement with the Russia stuff.
The Russia stuff.
The New York Times put out a beautiful piece on Thursday that really illustrates the timeline of where we've gone and where we're expecting to go and what Bobby Mueller's been up to this whole time. It should be available online, so I highly recommend you check it out. But just the quick facts. When people talk about the Russia stuff, it seems like this really deep web, deep state, kind of dark, mysterious kind of thing. And it's really not. It's pretty straightforward. What happened was, leading up to the election, as it became clearer and clearer that Donald Trump was going to be the Republican nominee for the presidency, we started to see a lot of online activity that was related to sabotaging the democratic systems, and the democratic system in this being the electorate, being the polls and everything. This took the form of Russian-led trolls, as we've termed them, people online just posting fake things, leading communities, getting people on board, and just feeding them misinformation, basically.
Yeah.
And that sounds really not that dramatic. It sounds like it's being really blown out of the water. But when you see that we had, like, there were events that these people made that were fake events, but they were, like, Unite the Right style events. They got people to show up to, and it just wasn't a real thing. It was created by someone sitting in a lab somewhere.
In Moscow.
In Moscow, exactly. You know, we have all the data and the analytics of things that were being shared related to, you know, the subversion. When Hillary's campaign chairman, his emails got hacked. When
John Podesta.
when the DNC's emails got hacked. When WikiLeaks started disseminating all of this information. When it gets put on a timeline like this, you start to see that it looks really coordinated.
Yeah, and the crazy and the Times did a really good job of laying out, like, before the campaign or before the election, after the election, of the transition, and then current stuff. And some of the stuff they map is the Donald Trump's tweets that came out during this time, and additionally, they, like, labeled all of the direct contact with Russians. Mm-hmm. And there was they label it in red, which is very helpful, because, like, there's just this sea of red in, like, the 5 months leading up to the election. And we can really tell, like, the coordination is kind of scary when you see almost like something tracking like tweets even. Like, there's a giant spike October 6th of 2016. Trump tweeting a bunch, and then the next day the DNC emails come out and the Access Hollywood tape. Yeah. And so you see, like, this just, like, the coordination is more present, and you can see these patterns that develop. And it's just the sea of red mm-hmm. that happens in here is just, it's so telling. Mm-hmm. And it's really hard because, you know, we hear about the Russia stuff all the time, and it's always on MSNBC and, you know, other stuff. And, you know, you hear people, they're always like, oh, like, you know, Russia stuff, I wish it would just end already, because it's just been, it feels like it's been going on for a long time, and it has, because it's important. And, you know, of course, like, you just see, of course, this investigation is going to take years, or probably not years, but it's taken more than a year, and you don't really get the breadth of why that is the case until you look at something and it's so mapped out for you. So we'd really recommend you take a look at this. We're not going to dive into every point because that would take a season of the 36% to even do that. So, anyways, check it out. It's very good. On related news with that, yesterday, Michael Cohen reports came out that he's talked numerous times for hours with the Mueller investigation, which is big. Manafort the other day has reports came out about his cooperation with them. And when you see people like this that have been so close and so pinnacle, especially Manafort is like the dirtiest one of these people. Yeah. His, you know, ties to the Ukraine. Yeah. It's just, it gives us a bit of hope, because I don't want this to end until we have enough to properly try every one of these people that has so corrupted and hurt the United States government. And so, you know.
And one last thing to touch on, I think it's really important when having this conversation with people to point out the fact that you mentioned earlier, the same day that a lot of the emails were leaked, the Access Hollywood tape came out too. And this coordinated effort to rig the 2016 election, I'm not convinced that it was necessarily from the get-go something that was designed to help Trump. I really think this was a plan that started just as a way to undermine a presidential election in America. I wholeheartedly believe that. Now, it gets really concerning when we have this mountain of evidence to suggest that, and we see an administration that refuses to go after the people that are responsible for this, really in any way.
Yeah.
In any way. So if nothing else, that should be the most concerning thing about it, is we can debate whether or not Russia handed the election to Trump. I don't think we'll ever get a solid answer on that. But what we do have an answer, and we have evidence on, is the fact that we know that interference occurred, and nothing's been done about it.
Oh, and the people that are to blame for that. I think honestly, I truly wish that we could implement like the people that are directly tied to the campaign in Russia. I have wholeheartedly believed that in some regard they will be like when this all comes out, they will be punished. One thing I really wish we could punish in a more concrete way is the blind willingness for Republican elected officials to just go along with this kind of unbelievable stories of denial with the Russian involvement and just being complicit in the destruction of our core values and institutions just through not doing shit. But you've just these people. The Republican Party has become so willing to just fold to this new far more conservative, way less structured, or honestly they're not even conservative. Conservatism is dead at this point. It's just a bunch of crazy slightly fascist authoritarian-esque sympathizers just wanting to make a shit ton of money, and you have ballless Republicans that are like, you know what we're gonna do? We're gonna go along with it. We don't even know what it's about, but you know what? We're gonna just damn the United States. Oh, anyways, dear God.
That brings us to our next segment. We're going to talk about Kansas.
Oh, good old Kansas.
Speaking of the death of classic conservatism
and decency
in America.
Anyways.
I wanted to take this last segment of the podcast to talk a little bit about Kansas and a little bit of political science theory. And
just what we're qualified to actually talk about.
Yeah. all this other stuff has just been us on our soapbox. This is going to be a little more of an academic approach. So, for all of you who aren't aware, there's a gubernatorial election going on this year in the great state of Kansas.
Ooh.
Most of you don't give a shit about that. That's fine. But there are a lot of lessons to be learned. So we have 3 candidates right now. We have the Republican, Chris Kobach, who was on the president's committee to find voter fraud or something like that. He has really positioned himself right along with the Trumpites, the Trumpies of the Republican Party, and he's largely modeled his campaign with the same kind of shock and awe tactics that we saw in 2016 with Trump's campaign. That's on the Republican side. On the Democrat side, we have Laura Kelly. Laura Kelly, the Democrat, she's the leader in the Senate of Kansas. Long history in Kansas politics. She's done a lot of good for the state. She's been an advocate for a lot of things. She is much more of a moderate Democrat, I would say. She pretty handily defeated one of the more liberal gubernatorial candidates. So she's got the connections to the people. She's got the money to run up against Kobach. And honestly, the people of Kansas are not so disillusioned that they are overwhelmingly convinced that Kobach is going to be a good choice. Now, keep in mind, this is a state that overwhelmingly went for Trump. Laura Kelly is a fine candidate. I think she has plenty of support among moderates from both parties. But we have a third candidate. We have Greg Orman.
And that's where we get into the political science aspect of this.
Yeah.
And why third-party candidates cannot exist in a single member
district plurality voting system, which is what we have here in America.
Ooh.
So a couple things to unpack here. SMDP system, as we just mentioned, is the voting system we use here in America that basically says the first one that gets a plurality, not a majority of the vote, so the first one that gets the most votes wins. So in a 3-person race like this, it wouldn't be the first one to 51 to
more than the rest.
Exactly.
So it means that all of the votes that go into that pool, it means that every vote that isn't towards the winning candidate is basically pointless.
Yep.
And what that does largely, and we can get into more of the reason for the SMDP system involving Duverger's law and our presidential system and how we vote for people. But just to focus on this, it's the reason that we can't have third-party candidates because what it does is it oftentimes takes the 2 most wanted candidates and it puts them out of the race. And then the last the individual that is least wanted is the one that wins because the other 2 split the vote. Mm-hmm. And you can see this not only in history, but recently in the Midwest. In our district here, we had for state senate with Cindy O'Loughlin, Craig Redmond, and Nate Walker. Redmond and Walker really split like the traditional Republican conservative vote, and you had O'Loughlin just dominate.
Yeah.
And while I think she was probably the most popular candidate of them to a degree, you could that's just like a recent example here. You can see it in we've mentioned Wilson a lot on the show apparently today, because he's the reason that we got it. Yeah, Wilson's Democratic election, because FDR and
it's Teddy. It was Teddy.
Oh, sorry, Teddy Roosevelt and Taft both split the
Republican
vote, which was back then the Democrat vote. I really. Ugh.
We'll get into that.
Yeah, anyways, dear God. But no, and then, most importantly, well, the one that we probably the biggest and most important in recent years, because arguably Wilson getting elected was not a bad thing, was the reason that Al Gore lost the election is because of the third-party candidate, Ralph Nader, who's from Florida, which is why, and he got 1.6% of the vote. And when you consider that Al Gore lost to George W. Bush by literally like 1/100th of the percentage of the vote, which is about 500 votes, you see how significant and how much of an impact third-party candidates, especially left-leaning third-party candidates, are. And so that's kind of what's going on in Kansas. And yeah, Brett, you want to talk a little more about that?
Yeah. So as Adam was touching on, an SMDP system is actually kind of detrimental to a representative democracy. I don't mean to suggest that we can't have independent candidates or that independent candidates are inherently bad for a democratic system. We should be able to have anybody run, especially if they're representing the views of their constituency. We should allow that, and that should be fine. That should not be a detriment to the system. However, because of this voting system that specifically makes you choose between a dichotomous pair against your own interest most of the time, which this gets into the whole thing of, I didn't want to vote for Hillary or Trump, so I put in a protest vote, or I didn't vote, or whatever. The reason we only have two people at the end of the day is because of the single-member district plurality system. And it's also why we only have two political parties. Because we use this system that says all you have to do is get more votes than the other guy, it leads all of these different little groups to get together in a big group, because that increases their chances of getting more votes than the other guy. That's what Duverger's law is, and that's a pretty important part of this whole rhetorical exercise. If you have like groups 1 through 5, and let's say that 1 is like the most conservative group, 5 is the most liberal group, they exist on this scale, whereas like 3 is right in the middle, 2 is leaning conservative, 4 is leaning liberal. As opposed to just each one of those 5 attempting to run, they'd have to then somehow beat the other 4. So let's say if 5, 4, and 3 all group together, because they share a decent number of interests, that increases their likelihoods of beating 2 and 1 exponentially. It gives them a much better chance. And so then that leads 2 and 1 to say, hey, we have similar views, and we're just going to get whooped if we try to run separately, so let's get together. And again, this is how we have a two-party system. So inside of that system, when you have this SMDP thing, this SMDP structure where you can only vote for one person, you don't get to rank order your best list or your candidates or your selections. It sometimes leads you to vote for people who you don't wholly agree with, but that you just like better than your other choice. And when you introduce a third-party candidate into that system, it screws up a lot of the math. And because, again, all you have to do is get the more votes than the other guy, it's not representative of what everybody wants. It is not representative of a constituency, because we're not getting a majority of the people voting for one person. We're just getting 30%. And, with the Trump presidency, he didn't win the popular vote. Bush didn't win the popular vote. Clinton, I don't remember. But the moral of the story is it hurts this whole concept of being representative of your constituents. And so again, I would love to exist in a system where we could have third-party candidates. I would love for the independent party to be a viable thing, because I think it's healthy for our system
and for a democracy. Yeah. It's more. It holds more to democratic beliefs. Democrat with a big D. Big D Democrat. We're done with this.
Yeah. Moral of the story is, Greg Orman, please, for the love of God, drop out so we don't end up with Chris Kobach.
Amen. Please.
Story over.
Please. All right. Well,
that brings us to the end of our show, more or less.
wow, we did it. Thanks for listening, guys. This has been real cool. We're going to cut what I just said in the past 5 seconds, and we're going to do our outro. The 36% was founded, written, and directed by Adam Childers Arnold and Brett Combs.
Music for this episode is provided by Purple Planet. Check them out at www.purple-planet.com.
The presenting sponsor of the 36% is Avian Apparel.
Our audio editing done by Bert Crumbs.
Our ukulele muse was Adam California.
The cover art for this podcast is done by Christian Ferguson.
Thank you so much for listening, guys, and welcome to
The 36%. Cool.
Wow.